I was looking at a book recently that had a wonderful quote from a Belgian business person, and I can't remember what the business is, but he said, in order to be happy, you have to be motivated. And in order to be motivated, you have to be responsible. And in order to be responsible, you have to know for whom and why you're working. And you have to be free to determine how you're going to do the work. And this strikes me as such an extraordinary insight into, at least for me, when I look back at 40 years at Patagonia, why has it been interesting work? Why has it been meaningful work? And I think it's because we've precisely had those conditions. I certainly haven't been happy all the time that I've worked at Patagonia. Nobody there has been happy all the time they worked. But there are tremendous stretches of time where you really feel that you're working for yourself, even though you're working for a company. Precisely because you feel when you feel responsible for what you're doing, when you feel like you have agency, that this is what you want to be doing, and that you can then act on it, it really makes a huge difference. I want to tell, yesterday I told the story of how Patagonia got involved with organic cotton, or made the commitment to organic cotton. And I wanted just to tell one story to kind of open up the session about what made it possible for us to act in a different way as a business. Because we were not especially bright people. We were not especially gifted business people, but we did pursue a path that was a little different from what other people did. And I think the first instance of this actually happened before I came to work at Patagonia and before there was a Patagonia, because we have our roots as a mountain climbing equipment company. It was Yvon Chouinard, as a teenager, started to make climbing equipment in his backyard. And he and his friends, this was in the late 1950s, were starting to climb the big walls of Yosemite that nobody had ever climbed before. Tommy Caldwell, very famously, in January, did this enormous feat of climbing without solely on the using his hands and feet. But Yvon and his friends were the first to actually climb these faces. And in those days, the pitons, which are the spikes used the climbers used to hammer into the rock and then support their weight as protection in case they take a fall, those pitons were made of soft iron. And they were all imported from Europe. And you could use these pitons 1 or 2 times. And then they would fail, they would bend. And if you're climbing these high routes, what you want is something that you can reuse time and again, because you don't want to carry all that metal around your neck. It's like having an automobile around your neck to climb a high wall. So Yvon became famous for these pitons. Chouinard Equipment was about the highest regarded climbing equipment company in the world, but very small because the community was small. But then in the late 1960s and the early 1970s, with the youth movement in the United States, the anti-war movement, there were more young people going to the mountains to hike and to backpack and to get some kind of, to feel the spiritual benefit of being in the mountains. And a lot more climbers. And those climbers would climb the same routes that Yvon and his friends had climbed. So all of a sudden you have many more people hammering these pitons into the same cracks. and the cracks started to widen, and you had to use larger pitons. And so Ivo and his friends are looking at this and they're saying, my God, the way we make our living is destroying the sport we love. And it's desecrating the rock. Is there anything we can do that's any different? And there was an alternative, because British climbers, who were notoriously cheap, used to pick up these little cogs that they would find along the railroad track. When they would use that, they could take these cogs and you could insert it into a crack and twist it without using a hammer, and it would hold you underway. And this became, they started to machine these and make, companies make these. But American climbers knew nothing about this. So Ivo determined to actually make the investment in tools and dies to make chocks in America. But you have this tremendous resistance because no climber has asked the company to make chocks. And if you're an American climber and you're used to the reassuring feel of hammering a piece of hard steel into a granite crack, you know that's going to hold your weight, as opposed to just kind of delicately twist a piece of aluminum into a crack. So the idea, the solution to this problem was to issue a catalog in June 1972 with a 12-page essay that was part manifesto and part user's manual on why climbers should switch from pitons to chocks, except in the case of an emergency or in the case where they're doing a new route, and then how to use them. So to tell you the impact of this, in June 1972 when the catalog went out, 70% of the business was pitons. And this is a very small business we're talking about. In dollars, it was $400,000, yeah, which would be like $2 or $3 million now. When I came to work in March 1973, 70% of the business was chocks. So that means that catalog became discussed. It was discussed at the base of every climbing route in the country. It was talked about in every climbing magazine in the country. And it made that huge influence. It made that huge difference in 9 months. So the reason I tell this story is that I think that this change that seemed risky at the time also gave us a kind of cultural confidence that we could do this. That if we could identify something that was very harmful, and we could identify a solution, that if we treated our customers as friends and as grown-ups, that we could be persuasive, that we could bring them along with us. So I don't think we could have made this later switch to organic cotton from conventional cotton if we didn't have this knowledge in the back of our minds from 15 years earlier, from 1972, that we could make this change. And of course, organic cotton, the switch to organic cotton became the kind of cultural basis for our work at Patagonia that allowed us to make many other kinds of changes. So I just wanted to kind of open up with that story. But for the most part, this session, what we want to do is really going to be directed by you and by the questions that you have about our company. There are a couple of areas I want to make sure that I touch on, and one is, so I'll mention them now. One is 1% for the planet. Martine is here, and at some point she might want to talk more directly about it. But it's an organization of businesses that give 1% of their sales to grassroots environmental causes. And those businesses are then entitled to use the logo on their business doors or on their letterhead. This is a significant, we started this practice in 1985. And it was one of the first things we did as a business that was unconventional. As a matter of fact, we started giving 1% of profits, 10% of profits. And then we decided, no, our accountants are way too gifted. They'll figure out a way to reduce this. So we'll make it 1% of sales, and it means that in good years or bad years, we are essentially paying a tax that we have determined for ourselves that we're going to give on behalf of the environment. The second thing I wanted to talk about is a very important movement in the United States called B Corps. And B stands for benefit, and it's a little complicated to explain because it means a couple of different things. There were three men who went to college together who started this movement around 2005 to get companies who are interested in putting their social and environmental values into writing and to really taking those values seriously to organize this movement called B Corps. And what they also do, they're called B Labs, and what they do is they come in, they have an assessment that companies can take on all kinds of practices. How do you treat your employees? What do you do in the community? What is your environmental impact, both directly and through the supply chain? And they have an audit procedure. So a company can take a self-assessment. You can answer this questionnaire, and then you figure out how you're doing, what your own practices are. If you reach a certain point, you can become an actual B Corp. You take the assessment before you become a B Corp. You have to have a certain score. And then they audit for a fee. They come in every 2 years and audit to see how you get a report card and you see whether you're getting better or worse. There's a second movement involving B Corps, and that is a legal movement in the United States, so that a company can actually write its most closely held values into its business charter, into its articles of incorporation. And what this means is that if you sell stock, somebody who buys into your company has to also abide by these values. When California became the 7th state in which a B corporation was legal, Patagonia became the first company in California to become a B Corp. Now there are 27 states. And it's also a huge movement in Latin America, but it's rather quiet here. It hasn't taken hold in Europe. But the reason I'm telling this story, I wanted to tell just one more story about it. The reason I'm talking about it to you is not to sell B Corps, but to talk about the advantages of having a community of businesses who are interested, who share similar values, and who want to help each other. I was talking to Tomasz. I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a few weeks ago. It's a small town in Michigan it has very bad weather. It used to make most of the furniture sold in America, and now it sells office furniture. There's an organization called Local First, and almost all the business people in Grand Rapids are first or second generation. They're not just coming into town from someplace else. They have a real investment in the quality of life of their community. They really care about the economic conditions. They care about the environmental impact of their work. So this organization is very strong. It's called Local First, of local businesses. And the woman who runs it talked to all of her friends and said, listen, you really ought to take this test, this B Corp assessment. And she got a lot of resistance. And after a while, they said, listen, you know, we tried this test. There's too many questions. We have 1 or 2 people working on this stuff. Is there anything that they can do that's simpler so that I can fill this out and it won't take a week's work, it'll just take a few hours. So she went to Philadelphia and talked to the B Corp people, and they said, okay, let's test out a simpler assessment. And they did that, and they did that with all these businesses in Grand Rapids. But then as a result of that, somebody in New York heard about it, and so now the city of New York has a goal to have half of its local businesses take this B Corp assessment by 2017 or 2018. So this gives you an idea of how ideas can spread. This is one woman in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who's the executive director of this tiny NGO, who asks a question, gets a positive answer. People do this, and then it spreads to a place like New York City. I have no idea the number of small businesses, but it would be in the tens of thousands. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to sit on my stool. Welcome your questions. Thank you so much again for coming.
Tak jestli nemá někdo okamžitě nějakou otázku, tak já navrhuju, že půjdeme do těch otázek, které se nám tady nashromažďují v tom systému. A až se budete cítit, že se chcete přihlásit, až dokončíme další otázku, tak klidně můžete. A těm, co ty otázky posílají, tak já v tom zkusím dělat aspoň trochu organický pořádek, aby dávali trochu smysl. Vidíme. I just suggest we will first take the questions which we got in the system, and then whenever people feel like proposing another question, they are just welcome to do it. And I will try to order the questions a little bit. And I will start with the easy one, with the first one, and it's regarding yesterday's conference. And somebody would like to ask you, how did you actually enjoy to be part of the conference? How did you find it? How did you like it?
No, it was great to be here, and I think there's something that interested me. I don't think you could have this kind of conference in the United States, because to have somebody from a Montessori school to really address the whole question of how here we are, we live in a city, we live in a particular country. How do we want to live? How do we want to live down the road 20, 30 years from now? How does all the business we do affect our society? And that's a very wonderful general topic that is made specific by having people in the community care. And in the United States, you would organize a conference around disciplines. That would be considered too broad a topic. The focus wouldn't be on a group of people talking about what they care about. It would be on this more, you would have an education conference, you would have a business conference. So I was very moved to be part of what was organized yesterday.
Tak někdo už zahlasoval, tak já se pustím do té otázky, která má nejvíc hlasů. Opakuji v češtině a pak ji přeložím do angličtiny. Proč mají lidé a společnost obecně problém dělat věci zodpovědně? Proč to nepřichází přirozeně, když něco začínají dělat? Why in general, in your opinion, people or society and companies as well have a challenge to do things responsibly from the very scratch when they start to do something. Why this approach is not sort of integrated, why it doesn't come naturally to do things responsibly.
Well, if I look back on the early days of Patagonia, there were certain things that we thought we were responsible for. When we made climbing equipment, we felt responsible for the lives of our customers. I mean, I used to inspect ice axes for hairline cracks, and you really have a strong sense that you want to do your work well. But we had no sense of responsibility when we started with clothing for what our clothes did for the environment. We had a sense of responsibility to our employees, but not through the supply chain. It just didn't occur to us. I think in the 70s, when we thought about the environment in general, or often when we thought about social issues, that was something the government was supposed to take care of. And what we did was considered, we didn't think we had a choice. And we only discovered this sense of responsibility over time, and it grew. You do one thing and you say, oh my gosh, I can, organic or conventional cotton is a nightmare. We can go organic, we can do this. Oh my gosh, polyester, our fleece is made out of polyester, it's made out of oil. We can't do anything about that, but we can use recycled soda bottles to make the fleece so that it's not from directly out of the oil well. And you start to think environmentally, and then you start to think about the conditions in the factory of the workers who are sewing the goods. You say, as somebody says, oh my God, we can't think about that. Those factories are owned by somebody else. We're already worried about the environment. How can you get into this? But no, you do. You say, okay, this is the right thing to do. But if you don't even know, if you don't even have any information, you can't start to be responsible. You can't start to be responsible until you recognize a problem and also have some information. But more practically, one of the things I advise a lot of entrepreneurs in the States, and people ask me, when should I become a member of 1% for the Planet? When should I become a B Corp? I should get some business going first. I need to get some income. And I tell people, I think it's much easier to start that way. To start as a B Corp or to start as 1% for the Planet. Because once your business starts to grow, then if you change its economic model, it's tough. If people are lending you money, it's tough on customers if you have to raise your prices. It's almost, I don't know how people save in this money individually in this country, but in the United States, a lot of people just put a certain amount of money transfer it into their savings every time they get a paycheck. And what happens is you forget about that. You never miss it. But if all of a sudden you want to take a vacation and go to the Himalayas and you need $4,000 and you have to save it seems very difficult. So I think it's the best practice is to adopt these, to adopt your sense of responsibility, what you care about the most, what you think you can do about most intimately as you start a business, and then allow that activity to grow. But it becomes more difficult anytime you say, now I want to work this into my cost structure.
Já bych navázal tady na to téma, když jste potom v určitý fázi firmy potřebovali investory, jakým způsobem vlastně probíhala diskuze s investory o tady tom zakořenění vlastně v tom základním genu Patagonie, že tam to je 1%.
Okay, so the question hitchhike on the previous question a little bit, and it is when at some point you were searching for investors, you have to come to talk to your investors. correct me if I'm not right. How much, or how did you manage to incorporate this topic into the discussion? How they react on it as well?
I think if you want to have a socially and environmentally responsible business, you also want to attract investors who are interested in the same thing. Because if you're talking to a banker who has no interest in this, they're going to they're not going to be very friendly, and it makes it much harder to establish a relationship. But there are a lot of investors, private and institutional, who is social impact investing. There are lots of kinds of names for it, who are looking for ways to invest money in responsible activities. I'd be careful about choosing your investors, unless it's your father-in-law.
Já bych se skočil na jiné téma. Mě zajímá to, jak se Patagonia vyvíjela, co se týče stylu managementu té firmy, protože se vyvinula od malinké firmy po velkou korporaci. A zajímá mě zejména managing týmu lidí, prostě jak přistupuje k lidem. A ještě víc specificky, co by Vincent už neudělal, jaké chyby prostě, jakých se v tomu vývoji dopustili.
So it's about the growth of the company and about the leadership, because you've been growing through the time. So what was the process, and maybe as well what kind of things you would never repeat again through the time? Yeah, mainly about the leadership.
I think Patagonia, so we've been in business 42 years, and if I look at the first, I almost see a dividing line of about 1990 and 92. So almost 20 years on one side where we were finding our way, we were adolescents in business, and then the last 20 years as grown-ups in business. And it took us a long time. And when we started to grow in the 1980s, there was a time I think we could have become a very conventional company because we had good sales, we had a growing number of customers, and we could have become like anybody else. And what we discovered was we didn't want to be like anyone else, particularly the owners of the company. I think there was a point where they would come into work in the morning and say, is this where I want to come to work? Is this the company I want to own? We made some fantastic mistakes. And one of them was in the late 1980s, the banks would give us anything we wanted. Anything we wanted. So we could borrow money from more than we needed, and we were growing at 40% a year. And then something interesting happened. The Berlin Wall fell. And when the Berlin Wall fell, the aerospace industry, which is a defense industry in California, fell apart. And when the defense industry in California fell apart, our bank started to fail. And when our bank went into workout, it was taken over by another bank, they called in all our loans. And we had, instead of 40% growth that year, because everything else was collapsing, we had 20% growth. And we suddenly realized that we were, and the bank came in, the bank was in danger of running our company. We were always a very sort of family-like company. We hired relatives, we hired friends of friends, and we had to lay off 20% of our people in one day. And after that day, what we never did is we never got into serious debt. We always kept a very a strong control over our own destiny, and we never were ambitious in growth to put ourselves in a position where we had to lay people off. We had some small layoffs, but they were voluntary. They weren't calling people in and saying you no longer work here. So that would be what we would never repeat. Would be to get into debt and to ever grow again without asking questions about how are we growing, why are we growing, what's going to happen with this. So growth is a double-edged sword.
Was it a time you became entrepreneur? Pardon? Was this time you released entrepreneur?
No, we became an entrepreneur in this. I think we were always entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Became more responsible entrepreneurs.
Because the best entrepreneur must bankrupt once.
Yes. I made the joke about the father-in-law. I worked. There are some times that I left Patagonia for a couple of years, and I worked for an Italian boot company, and the guy said, somebody asked the owner, he said, what experience do you have in business? It was probably a bank. And he said, oh, I have the best possible experience in business. I bankrupted my father-in-law's company.
Já se mu zeptám, Stando, bylo to zodpovězeno, nebo to mířilo víc ještě na tu týmovou...
Mě zajímalo, jak se vlastně chovají k těm týmům, jakým způsobem je řídí vlastně, jak řídí svoje lidi, jak s nimi pracují.
Jo, já se omlouvám, jenom mám pocit, že tohle trošku uniklo, když jsem nepřekládala. So I'll just add on the question. It was as well about the team coordination and how you treat your... No, it's fine, as well was not very clear with the question. So not only the leadership regarding the resources and so on, but as well the human part and how you manage your employees.
I'm sorry, that was an important part of the question I missed. Again, when the company started, it was a very small group of climbers and surfers. So to give you an idea of the culture 40 years ago, it's not like this now. I used to get a bonus, everybody was paid a bonus of 10% if you worked 40 hours in a week. Because everyone wanted to go climbing and surfing and they didn't want to work. And I actually climbed the management ladder at the age of 20 because I didn't surf. So when the phones rang and the waves were good, I was the only one who would answer the phone. So they made me sales manager. But I think the strength of the company was that because it was very collegial and never hierarchical or formal. And because when you have a situation in which people feel that they can figure out how they're going to do the work, people do that. So that part of the culture has always been very strong. Where we sometimes get into trouble, okay, that's the leadership in the middle has always been strong. We've had a harder time with top leadership because you get people who have built careers at other companies in a more authoritarian top-down way, or they're used to certain kinds of systems that they think work, and they try to bring that into the company. But I think the middle of the company has always kept us going through periods where the top management wasn't as effective as it should be. I think now the management is good. And the difference is I think that a lot of the leadership came up from the ranks in the company. So our COO, his mother used to be the controller of the company. Now we have second generation employees. I hired him in customer service a long time ago, but then he left the company. He went to business school. He had big jobs at Obermeyer and at North Face, and then came back to the company. So he combines this experience that he gained in larger companies with this kind of cultural familiarity with Patagonia. Our CEO is a woman named Rose Marcario, who worked in some of the dirtiest businesses, venture capital, but never felt comfortable. And now that she's CEO, one of the problems we've had in the past is the CEO would come in and say, okay, I'm the business person, and there are the crazy Chenards who own the place, and all these weird people who do all the work. But I'm going to make sure that the bottom line is okay. But Rose has a lot of business confidence, and at the same time wants to make Patagonia an even more interesting business. She wants to really use Patagonia to create social and environmental change. So she's into it. She's not saying, okay, I'm not holding off the rest of the company. I'm going to direct it. And that's a big difference. It's a long answer to your question, but it's for me, that when I wrote the book with Yvonne, it was the biggest question I had for myself was, this company was so interesting when I came to work here in '73, and it has its best qualities that it has now. How is that possible? And the answer I came to was this informal culture of people getting the work done on their own and in groups, that they feel self-directed. They don't feel like they have to wait to be told. And also a strong culture of never saying no, which can be a real pain sometimes, but that's the attitude we have to the customer, is you don't say no.
There's quite a discussed topic. There's a discussed topic in the United States and also in Europe. This is the income inequality. Yes. That the top management is taking like 300 times more than the normal employee. I would like to know how it is in your company, this difference, and if it is different, so how you hire really the best people then.
Thank you. I'm not sure what the ratio is, but it's not as extreme in most companies. We have kind of the same pressures if we're hiring from other companies. What do we pay the marketing person? And we often refuse for top positions to pay what people are getting in other industries. We have a high minimum wage, 3 times higher than legal, and we're looking at an even higher rate. There's a movement right now to really establish the minimum wage as something close to what it actually costs to live, and we would support that. Then we get pressures like IT people are now really expensive. And so we have to look at that. I don't think we're great, but we're certainly not outrageous.
So it's sensitive to this question.
Yeah, we're sensitive to the question.
There's one thing, the owner's company, the best number is an odd number, but 3 is too much. So how we work together with Elon, would you be able to describe your relations and how you find you respecting each other? Was it more intuition, or you really get angry against each other once, or you have some quizzes, or you said, "Oh fuck, I don't work with you," and something like this? Please.
Okay, I'll give the floor, but I will just ask the other people. I will put one more question from the list after, so keep your questions for later.
Sorry.
So the question is, do we all get along? I think that there's a big graveyard behind Patagonia of again, I think that the relations at the middle level of the company and is very strong. It's been sometimes very hard with the people at the very top of the company. I'm Evol's nephew, and I've always had a strong relationship with him, and with Melinda, his wife. But we once did chase each other around the warehouse screaming whether we were doing enough for our dealers. And but in general, you don't find a lot of people shouting at Patagonia Car. So you have the opposite problem, which is nobody will say that they have a problem, and then they'll quietly do something different. Passive aggressive. That's our problem.
Tak já si dovolím otázku, která měla 6 hlasů ze systému. A je v angličtině, tak jenom přečtu. Switching to organic cotton probably meant rising costs. Could this step put your business into danger in case your customers wouldn't accept it or so? So I took this one because it has a lot of votes in the system.
Yeah. To give you a little bit more background, when we got into the piton business, the soft pitons I described that were imported cost 15 cents a piece. And when we made these hard steel pitons, they cost $1.50. So we were used to challenging the understanding of what the price should be of something. When we switched to organic cotton, I was just looking at a price list, and I think a flannel shirt went from $18 to $23. And so it was big, and what we were worried. So we did our best to persuade our customers to conduct an education campaign. What often I see happens is when sometimes you make a move for environmental benefit that saves money. That's half the time. If you're doing something for social benefit, that often becomes more expensive because that's connected to labor, making sure that someone is paid fairly. But often we see that those costs are one time, that they happen in the first year. And if you can absorb it, and if you can get your other suppliers to help absorb some of the cost too, that a few years down the line it doesn't make so much difference. There's a huge difference in the price of organic cotton as a commodity versus conventional cotton, but as the total price of the shirt, it's not that big a deal
anymore.
So let me ask you a question in relationship to the management practices that somebody has asked. And oftentimes when you try to adopt traditional systems and practices, they don't fit. So what were the ones that proved to be very effective for you in terms of like simple things like meetings and maybe some other things that you would attribute to Patagonia's success?
You know, we don't have a lot of, we haven't done a lot of kind of systematic organizational development work. That's an area where we're not strong. There are other businesses that have done more interesting things. I think that we have not, one thing that does work for us is that nobody is afraid to question a decision. So nobody feels that if I'm a person who's in charge of the printing for a hang tag, and if I question the kind of packaging that we're doing, that's fine. People have to deal with that question. So I think that's the primary thing that's helped us work. It also creates a problem of too many meetings and decisions that take too long to make. But we don't have the other. We periodically experiment. I was teaching employees in Reno, and I noticed that we had taken over an entire hotel. And I said, what are we all doing here? And somebody said, oh, we're studying the Toyota system for lean manufacturing. And so we had like 40 people. And then periodically we'll do that. We'll have some large engagement with a system that somebody's using. Does that answer your question? Or?
It kind of answers it, but maybe there are some really simple things that you're doing which would be not conventional, that you are maybe not just proud of, but you see they make things easier to collaborate or get things done.
Well, the other thing that makes a difference is counterintuitive. I mean, in the one sense, you have employees who feel that they can participate in any decision. But the other thing is that the environmental work actually makes a huge difference. When we do something really hard, and the employees feel like they can get behind it. When we did Footprint Chronicles, or we started Common Threads, everybody involved with those projects is very passionate about it, and it actually creates a stronger bond with community, with the employees. So I think that's something business people would tend not to think about, but it's something I've observed that's really made a difference, and it's tangible. I once had a consultant come in from KMPG, and he was looking at our IT systems, and he was from Germany, and I said, well, what I said, what do you notice that's different about this place? And he said, well, your people are much more motivated to work than any place I've ever been. And I said, anything else? And he says, yeah, you're 10 times as complex. He said, I asked him that. I said, what size business do you see as complex as ours? And he said, businesses that are 10 times your size. So that's a disadvantage for us, but also I think it's actually been an advantage. The complexity is like a complex ecosystem. It's hard to answer that question in a kind of systematic way.
Jo, tady byla ještě nějaká dáma, tak já dovolím, budete si pamatovat dotaz. Tak já nejdřív vezmu dámu, pak vás a pak jenom, kde mám Tomáše, pak by asi měla být ta přestávka. Že bychom dali ještě 2 dotazy a pak by byla přestávka.
10. Teďka 10 na nových hodinkách, 10:40, že bychom měli přestávku 20minutovou. Jo, sorry, tak pojďme 10:40.
Jo, tak já odeberu ty 2 dotazy a myslím si, že to tak vyjde. We just confirmed that we will take these 2 people raising hands with their questions, and then we give the floor for a break for some time. So I'm glad this question came before mine, because my question is related to the Footprint Chronicles. And I would like to ask about sustainability and social environmental responsibility within the supply chains. Because we go to our suppliers and we want them to be sustainable, but then behind them there can be hundreds of other companies within the branch. So the question is, how far are you with the traceability and with the externalities work? Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great question. We did not. We switched to we engaged in environmental questions in the mid-90s, but then we were not engaged in questions in the supply chain in terms of labor until about 1996, when there were huge scandals. It was a huge scandal. An American celebrity who was a TV star had her name attached to a line of clothing that turned out to be made by child labor. And this was revealed by an NGO. A lot of attention on campuses. And so President Clinton had organized a conference on this, and Patagonia was part of that. And we helped organize an association called Fair Labor Association that would go in to audit conditions in the factories. So that was the first time we were involved at that level. But as Teresa pointed out, the big question is if you develop a program where you're looking in the factories, these supply chains are incredibly deep. So what goes on in the mills, both in terms of labor and environmentally. So that's been the biggest challenge. I think for all the work we did a lot of work between 1996 and 2011 in the cut and sew in the garment factories. But only in 2011 did we start to conduct audits in the mills. And because no light has been shining on that, you find a lot of things that need immediate change. We will go, we're committed to going deep. Audits are a very limited tool because you've got somebody going in once every year or two into a factory. What you really want to do is to create a climate that actually, in a partnership with your suppliers, that creates the right conditions in the first place rather than just do a corrective action. But it's tough. I mean, we work with, at one point, we had a CEO who did the wrong thing, who wanted to really expand our supplier base and said, oh, we're paying too much money. We can go here, we can go there, we can and lower our costs and increase our margins. And we did that, and our quality went to hell. And we had no idea what was going on in the factories, because we had when you 150, 160 factories, we couldn't really have relationships with them. So we cut back to a smaller group of less than 50 factories. And among those factories, we work with, I'm not sure the specific number, but there's some that we work with really closely. And those relationships, we hope, will be the basis of all the relationships with factories in the future. We use, I don't know how IKEA does it, but we use an organization in Switzerland called Blue Sign that actually looks at the chemicals that we use in terms of the dyes and the processes that go into fabrics. And we're working to get more and more of our suppliers to subscribe to these very high Blue Sign standards. But to give you an example, when we just went in, we just started to audit the mills in 2011, and the first thing we found, we were in Taiwan, is the auditors were working, and all of a sudden, all these workers in Taiwan are from Thailand and Indonesia. And we find out they're paying labor brokers up to $7,000 for a job that has a 2-year visa. And these are really low-paid jobs. So essentially, they're giving half their income to the broker. And when you're in that kind of industrial system, one of the things, if you then pull out, you're then hurting a lot of workers. So what we did was devise. We went to our suppliers, and they said, "Oh yeah, we didn't know it was that high. We just hire the brokers. We don't take the commissions out. This is just the way it's always been done." And so we pointed out, and we said, this is what they call human trafficking everywhere in the world. And this is really unacceptable to us. So we worked out with them a way to, first of all, we said, okay, you have to pay back everything that's over the legal limit. The legal limit was $2,000 for a job. And we'll help you. you don't have to pay the whole thing. We'll help you with this. We'll participate. But then you have to make it a rule that by July 2015, you're not going to use labor brokers anymore, and we'll help you figure out another system so that you can get workers. And then we went through the Taiwanese government, and the Taiwanese government thought, oh, this is a great plan. We'll try and use this in other industries. So it's another case in which you do something and it can spread. There's a documentary out I haven't seen yet called The True Cost, which is specifically about the fashion industry, and then contrasts these images of models on runways with Rana Plaza and with the conditions of the workers and a lot of the people who are doing sewing. So it's a very long answer, but it's a really complicated issue. I know IKEA does a lot with wood that goes into its products, and a lot of work on that. IKEA has a little different model because we're well, I don't know enough. I'm not going to talk about it.